Melanie Carter tightened her grip on the worn navy boarding pass as her mother leaned over her shoulder with a theatrical smile. "Economy," her mother said loudly enough for half the gate to hear. "She can't even afford a decent seat." Several nearby passengers glanced up from their phones. Ethan, Melanie's stepbrother, laughed without hesitation. He waved his glossy business-class boarding pass between two fingers. "I told you she'd still be pinching pennies," he said. "Meanwhile, some of us know how to travel." Their relatives chuckled. One of their cousins shook his head. "Maybe next year you'll save enough for legroom." Melanie didn't answer. She simply folded her boarding pass once and slipped it back into her passport. Her silence only encouraged them. Their mother hooked her arm through Ethan's. "Come on," she said proudly. "Let's head to the VIP lounge. No point sitting out here with everyone else." Ethan looked back over his shoulder with a grin. Try not to fall asleep waiting for Zone 6. The automatic lounge doors closed behind them. Melanie remained where she was. Then, just as the boarding announcement chimed through the terminal, the cockpit door at the jet bridge opened. And a uniformed captain stepped into the gate area, looking directly toward her. Melanie had learned years ago that arguing with her family never changed anything. If she defended herself, Ethan called her sensitive. If she explained her job, her mother dismissed it as government paperwork. If she celebrated a promotion, someone inevitably compared it to Ethan's newest car, expensive vacation, or luxury watch. Eventually, silence became easier. She worked hard, paid her own bills, and traveled whenever her schedule allowed. She didn't need approval from people who had already decided appearances mattered more than character. Around her, passengers began gathering near the boarding lanes. Children tugged rolling suitcases behind their parents. Business travelers checked watches. The gate agent prepared the scanner. The lounge doors opened again as Ethan and their mother returned, carrying complimentary coffees and pastries. Ethan spotted Melanie immediately. "Still sitting there?" he asked with a smirk. "Didn't anyone upgrade you out of pity?" Their mother laughed softly. "I suppose some people just have to know their place." Melanie rose without responding and adjusted the strap of her carry-on. Boarding was about to begin. But instead of the gate agent calling the first passengers forward, a tall captain in full uniform emerged from the jet bridge. His eyes swept across the waiting crowd. Not casually. Purposefully. Passengers instinctively stepped aside as he walked through the center of the boarding area. Straight toward Melanie. He stopped only inches away, his expression breaking into a warm smile. "Ms. Melanie Carter," he said, "we've been hoping you'd be on today's flight." Every conversation around gate 27 fell silent. Even Ethan stopped smiling. The silence around gate 27 stretched for several long seconds. Melanie blinked, clearly caught off guard. "I'm sorry," she asked. The captain smiled politely. "Ms. Carter, do you have a moment? I'd appreciate speaking with you privately before we begin boarding." Ethan folded his arms. "Oh, this should be interesting." Their mother exchanged a smug glance with him. "I knew something was wrong," she whispered. "Maybe there's an issue with her ticket." One of their cousins leaned closer. "I've seen this before," he muttered. "People get pulled aside when there's a security problem." Melanie felt every eye around her settle on her. She wasn't embarrassed. She was simply confused. "Of course," she answered the captain quietly. He gestured toward a quieter corner near the gate windows. "If you don't mind." She followed him, leaving behind a crowd that had already started inventing its own explanation. The moment they were out of earshot, the captain extended his hand. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person." Melanie shook it. "I think you may have mistaken me for someone else." "Oh, not at all." His smile widened. "I've wanted to thank you for months." Melanie frowned. "For what?" "You probably don't realize how many people owe you more than they'll ever know." She looked around to make sure nobody could overhear. I really wasn't expecting this. I know. And honestly, she added, lowering her voice, I'd rather not become the center of attention. The captain nodded immediately. That's exactly what they told me you would say. Melanie gave a small, embarrassed laugh. I've always preferred staying in the background. I noticed. He glanced toward the waiting passengers. Unfortunately, some people deserve to be recognized whether they ask for it or not. His words stirred memories she rarely visited. Years earlier, when she had accepted her first position as an aviation safety inspector, she'd gone home excited to tell her family. Her mother barely looked up from her phone. So, you inspect paperwork? It's much more than paperwork, Melanie had explained. We investigate safety failures, maintenance compliance. Ethan interrupted before she could finish. So basically, you're the world's most expensive clipboard holder. Everyone had laughed. Even when she earned promotions. Became the youngest senior investigator in her division. Led increasingly important safety reviews. She stopped mentioning them. Every achievement received the same response. Government jobs aren't impressive. Real success buys nicer cars. You should learn something from Ethan. Meanwhile, Ethan rarely paid for anything himself. Their mother financed his luxury vacations, helped with his apartment, even paid for today's business class ticket. Melanie had quietly purchased her own economy seat weeks earlier, without mentioning it to anyone. She had long ago accepted that invisible accomplishments mattered less to her family than visible spending. The captain gently interrupted her thoughts. I appreciate you making time for this flight despite your schedule. She smiled politely. It was just a personal trip. I know. He hesitated. There are quite a few people on this aircraft who have absolutely no idea what they owe you. Melanie immediately shook her head. Please. He stopped. I really don't want this to become a public spectacle. I understand. I was simply doing my job. The captain's expression became thoughtful. Sometimes doing your job changes more lives than anyone realizes. Melanie lowered her eyes. Even so, I'd rather people board their flight than listen to speeches. I'll remember that. Together, they walked back toward the boarding lanes. The atmosphere had changed. Passengers who had ignored Melanie earlier were now watching her with open curiosity. Ethan tried to laugh, but it sounded forced. So, he called across the waiting area. Everything okay? Melanie simply nodded. Everything's fine. Their mother studied the captain instead of Melanie now. The respect in his posture wasn't difficult to notice. He wasn't treating Melanie like an ordinary passenger. He was treating her like someone whose presence genuinely mattered. For the first time all morning, Ethan's confidence slipped. Just slightly. The captain stepped over to the gate counter. Leaning toward the gate supervisor, he spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. Her eyes widened. She immediately reached for the boarding controls. The captain gave one final instruction. Please don't begin boarding until I receive confirmation. The gate supervisor nodded without hesitation. Ethan's smile disappeared. The gate agent's hand hovered over the boarding scanner. Instead of making the usual announcement, she looked toward the jet bridge, then back at her computer. Thank you for your patience, she said over the speaker. Boarding will begin shortly. A murmur rippled through the waiting area. Business travelers checked their watches. A child asked his father why the line had stopped. Ethan glanced at his expensive watch with exaggerated annoyance. Unbelievable, he said loudly. Some people can't even check in without creating delays. He looked directly at Melanie. Whatever happened back there, I hope it's worth making everyone late. A few passengers turned toward her again. Melanie didn't answer. She rested one hand on the handle of her carry-on and quietly waited. Her silence frustrated Ethan more than any reply could have. "Oh, come on," he continued. "You can at least tell everyone what you did." Their mother gave a sympathetic smile, not to Melanie, but to the surrounding passengers. "I'm so sorry," she said. "She's always had a way of attracting unnecessary complications." Melanie kept her eyes on the departure screen. The boarding time hadn't changed. Only the atmosphere had. Then the automatic doors near the operations office opened. A woman in a Navy airline blazer walked briskly toward the gate, accompanied by another employee carrying a tablet. The name badge on her jacket identified her as *** station manager ***. The moment she spotted Melanie, her expression softened. She walked straight past Ethan, past the waiting passengers, and stopped in front of Melanie. "Ms. Carter." Melanie nodded politely. "Yes." The manager smiled warmly. "I'm so sorry." Melanie looked puzzled. "For what?" "I should have recognized you the moment you checked in this morning." Before Melanie could respond, the manager extended her hand. "It's a privilege to finally meet you." The nearby gate agents immediately straightened their posture. One quietly stepped aside to give the manager room. Even the flight attendants waiting near the aircraft door turned their attention toward Melanie. Ethan's confident expression began to fade. He looked from the manager to his mother. "What is this?" His mother didn't answer. She was watching the exchange just as closely. The station manager lowered her voice. "We've been hopping. We'd have the opportunity to thank you personally." Melanie gave a small, uneasy smile. "That really isn't necessary." "I'm afraid we disagree." The manager glanced toward the captain, who had just emerged from the jet bridge again. "He insisted that if you ever happen to travel with us, we shouldn't let the moment pass." Melanie looked almost embarrassed. "I would honestly prefer to keep things simple." "I know." The manager smiled. "That's exactly what we were told." Passengers nearby exchanged confused looks. One businessman whispered to another, "Who is she?" "No idea. But everyone from the airline seems to know her." Ethan folded his arms tighter. "So she knows airline employees," he muttered. "Big deal." His words sounded far less convincing than before. Their mother suddenly stepped forward with a bright smile that hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. "I should introduce myself," she said. "I'm Melanie's mother." The manager nodded politely. "It's nice to meet you." Then she turned her full attention back to Melanie. No one missed the difference. The smile on their mother's face stiffened. The manager reached into a folder. "There has been one adjustment to today's arrangements." Melanie frowned. "Adjustment?" "Yes. We've changed your seat assignment." Ethan gave a short laugh. "There it is." He nudged one of their cousins. "I knew this whole thing was about an upgrade." His cousin shrugged. "Probably operational." Ethan smirked. "Exactly, she got lucky." Before anyone could say another word, the captain returned from the jet bridge. This time, he wasn't carrying flight paperwork. Under one arm rested a dark blue presentation folder, embossed with the airline's gold crest. The conversations around the gate stopped again. Every eye followed him as he walked toward Melanie. The captain stopped beside Melanie and turned toward the waiting passengers instead of the boarding gate. He exchanged a brief nod with the station manager. Then he reached for the microphone, normally used for boarding announcements. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his calm voice carrying across the terminal, "thank you for your patience. Before we begin boarding, I'd like to take just a moment." The gate area grew quiet. Conversations faded. Phones lowered. Even the children stopped talking as parents looked toward the captain. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "This is getting ridiculous," he muttered. Their mother forced a small smile. "I'm sure it'll only take a minute." but neither of them sounded confident anymore. The captain looked around the gate before speaking again. Several months ago, our airline was preparing for one of the busiest travel seasons of the year. He paused. During a routine aviation safety investigation, a maintenance issue was discovered that had gone unnoticed. Passengers listened intently. It wasn't a visible problem. It wasn't something travelers could have seen. But left unresolved, it could have affected multiple aircraft operating throughout our network. A man near the front quietly whispered to his wife. "So that's why this is happening." The captain continued. Because the issue was identified before it reached the fleet, new inspection procedures were introduced across our maintenance operations. He looked toward Melanie. The investigation prevented a risk before anyone was ever placed in danger. He still hadn't explained Melanie's connection. The uncertainty only deepened the curiosity spreading through the terminal. A teenager standing near the window whispered to his father. "Who actually found it?" His father shrugged. "I guess we're about to find out." The station manager stepped forward beside the captain. "There is one person responsible for leading that investigation." She turned toward Melanie with unmistakable respect. "Ms. Melanie Carter." The words settled over the gate like complete silence. The investigation team she led identified the maintenance issue before a single passenger was placed at risk. The manager continued. Her recommendations became part of the safety procedures now used throughout our airline. Several passengers instinctively turned to look at Melanie. The woman Ethan had mocked over an economy boarding pass suddenly looked very different. The captain smiled. When our executive team learned Ms. Carter would be traveling with us today, they asked that we thank her personally. Melanie lowered her eyes. "I really didn't expect any of this." "We know," the captain replied warmly. "You've declined public recognition every time it was offered." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. One businessman quietly said, "She turned it down." Another nodded slowly. Most people would have wanted the publicity. Melanie simply clasped her hands together. "I was doing my job." The captain answered gently. "And because you did your job exceptionally well, thousands of other people were able to travel safely without ever knowing your name." No one spoke. Not even Ethan. His face had gone pale. He remembered every joke, every comment about cheap seats, every laugh that had echoed through the gate only minutes earlier. Around him, several passengers who had smiled at his remarks now deliberately looked away. One elderly woman shook her head in quiet disappointment. Another traveler whispered just loudly enough to hear. "So that's the sister he was making fun of." Their mother stared at the floor. The confidence she'd carried into the VIP lounge had completely disappeared. For the first time that morning, she had nothing to say. The station manager stepped closer to Melanie. "Ms. Carter, we'd like to invite you to board first." Melanie hesitated. "That's really not necessary." "It is to us." She looked toward Ethan for only a moment. Not with satisfaction. Not with anger. Simply with quiet composure. The same composure he had mistaken for weakness all his life. Just as Melanie reached for her carry-on, another airline executive emerged from the operations corridor. He carried a large framed certificate, wrapped carefully in protective packaging. The captain smiled. There they are. Every head in the terminal turned once again. The airline executive crossed the terminal with measured steps, holding the framed certificate carefully in both hands. His tailored navy suit bore the airline's executive insignia, and 2 additional staff members followed behind him. He stopped in front of Melanie and smiled. "Ms. Carter, thank you for allowing us to do something you've spent months trying to avoid." Melanie gave a modest smile. "I honestly didn't know any of this had been planned." "We know." He accepted the framed certificate from his assistant before facing the passengers. Many of you have heard part of the story, he said. Allow me to explain why today matters so much to our airline. The gate area remained completely silent. A little over 8 months ago, our maintenance division completed what appeared to be a routine inspection. Every required document had been signed. Every checklist appeared complete. He paused, but Ms. Carter noticed a pattern that others had overlooked. Melanie lowered her eyes. The executive continued. She questioned maintenance records that technically met every regulation, but revealed subtle inconsistencies across multiple aircraft. Most investigators would have accepted the paperwork. He looked directly at Melanie. She didn't. The captain nodded quietly beside him. She insisted on expanding the investigation. The executive continued. Her team uncovered an overlooked maintenance procedure affecting several aircraft models. Because she refused to ignore those warning signs, every affected aircraft was re-inspected before the issue could place passengers at risk. A murmur swept through the waiting area. One passenger whispered, "She probably saved lives." Another answered softly, "And nobody even knew." The executive nodded as if he had heard them. Exactly. He looked around the terminal. The safest flights are often the ones where passengers never realize someone prevented a problem before it ever existed. He turned back toward Melanie. Our airline updated maintenance procedures nationwide because of your recommendations. Those procedures remain in place today. The captain smiled. I've personally flown aircraft that benefited from those changes. He looked directly at Melanie. I've wanted to thank you ever since I read your report. Melanie blinked, visibly moved. I was only doing what every investigator is supposed to do. The captain shook his head. No. You did what an exceptional investigator does. He accepted the framed certificate from the executive and presented it to her. It read, "In recognition of Melanie Carter, for outstanding leadership in advancing aviation safety and protecting countless passengers through professional excellence and integrity." For a moment, Melanie simply stared at it. She had received awards before. Most had gone into drawers. Some were still in unopened boxes. But this one was different. Not because it was public. Because it represented the lives that would never know her name. The passengers began applauding. It started with one person near the front. Then another. Within seconds, the entire gate area was on its feet. Several flight attendants joined in. Ground crew members applauded from the jet bridge entrance. The captain applauded too. Melanie smiled through damp eyes. Thank you, she said quietly. I've never believed safety work was about recognition. It isn't, the executive replied. It's about responsibility. He smiled warmly. But responsibility deserves gratitude. As the applause faded, Ethan stood frozen a few yards away. Only minutes earlier, he had proudly waved his premium boarding pass for everyone to see. Now no one was looking at his seat. No one cared about the VIP lounge. No one remembered his expensive watch. They remembered what he had said. She can't even afford a decent seat. Those words seemed louder now than when he had spoken them. He slowly approached Melanie. He hesitated. I'm sorry. Melanie looked at him calmly. For what? His eyes dropped. For everything. For today. For all of it. She searched his face. There was embarrassment. There was regret. But she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I hope someday, she said gently, you learn to measure people by more than what everyone can see. Ethan couldn't answer. He simply stepped back. Their mother approached next. Her confident smile from earlier had vanished. I've always been proud of you, she said quietly. Melanie met her eyes. No. Her voice remained calm. You've been proud of me for about 10 minutes. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Her mother's shoulders slowly slumped. For the first time in years, there was no excuse. No comparison. No way to pretend the favoritism had never existed. The truth had unfolded in front of strangers. Nothing could erase it. The station manager smiled. "Ms. Carter, if you're ready, we'd be honored to welcome you aboard." She handed Melanie a new boarding pass. "Business class." The captain added with a grin, "And before we depart, we'd like you to join us briefly on the flight deck for the pre-flight safety briefing." Melanie laughed softly. "Now that, I wasn't expecting. You've earned it." As she walked toward the aircraft, passengers stepped aside voluntarily. Many thanked her. Others simply nodded with quiet respect. No one mentioned her original boarding pass. It no longer mattered. Behind her, Ethan boarded with the same premium seat he had bragged about all morning. Only now it was just another seat on the airplane. The symbol he had relied on had lost every bit of its power. Months later, Melanie noticed something had quietly changed. When new neighbors asked what she did for a living, she answered honestly instead of brushing the question aside. When colleagues congratulated her on another successful investigation, she accepted their kindness instead of changing the subject. She hadn't become someone who chased attention. She had simply stopped hiding her accomplishments to make other people comfortable. Her relationship with Ethan never returned to what it had been. Polite conversations replaced forced family gatherings. Trust, once broken for so many years, could not be rebuilt overnight. Their mother tried more than once to reconnect. Melanie welcomed respectful conversations, but she no longer accepted being treated as the invisible child whose worth depended on someone else's approval. She had finally learned the difference between keeping peace and surrendering self-respect. Every time she boarded a plane after that day, she smiled when she saw passengers settling into first class, business class, premium economy, and economy. Different seats, different prices, the same destination. Because she understood something her family had taken years to learn. A boarding pass can tell people where you're sitting. It can never tell them who you are.